In this video, we're going to focus on how we can use a toggle button here to maximum the size here, as you can see here, and we close it again, we're going back to its original shape. And of course, we want to make sure that this is also mobile responsive here. So if I click on this, you can see here it's toggles, and if I click back, it goes back into its shape again. Beautiful. So let's start to explore how to do this. So let's start to explore how we can toggle a single chart on click to make it full screen and mobile responsive in Chartjs. So the first thing what we need here is to get our default code. And you can find a default code on chartjs3.com getting started. This specific link, you can find the link in the description box as well. Scroll down here and just copy this chunk of code here. So once you copy this, and if you want to understand what this code does, make sure you watch this video that explains all the JavaScript of that code. So then I'm going to paste that in there. And then what I want to do here is cut this out. And once I did that, paste the title in here, save that, refresh, and there we are. So now we have a nice bar chart. So for this video, I think it would be very nice to have a donut chart instead. So I'm going to say the donut. And then here for the scales, I'm going to remove these scales. We don't need them. Save this, refresh, and there you are. So you can see here, this donut chart is of course quite big, so we want to adjust it. Well, I want to do two things. First of all, I will say here cut out. This will be the cut out percentage. Let's make it 90%. That's a string value. Save that. Refresh. Alright, that looks slightly better, but of course, let's reduce the size of the chart to 400 pixels. Save that. Refresh. There we are. So now it looks decent, but of course, we have to do a lot of work here. What we need to do is we need to work with CSS, we need to work with JavaScript and Chartjs. Each of these, they have their individual settings, and what we have to do is now to combine them all together. So what we're going to do now, first of all, I guess the best would be just to add up here a nice button, which will be our toggle button. So let's go here in this specific item, and then what I want to do here, just in the chart box, I'm going to say here button. And then here we're going to say, well, we can give it a class. We're going to give it some nice design, btn. And then what I'm going to say here, Onclick equals toggle chart. And this eventually will have, let's say here, full screen or toggle size. And here, closing button. All right, so now we have this. And what we need next, and this is very important, without this it will not work. We need to create here another div. And this div is basically a container specifically here for the canvas. Without this, we will have some problem afterwards. So we need to make sure that we have our own div, and that div will make sure that it will be only dedicated to the canvas, so it will get the maximum height and width of that canvas or of that div. So this is very important, because if you would put it in here, it somehow will calculate this height here as well, and it will counteract on each other. So anyway, let's say here class. Now we say here a holder. So we create a div for basically a container or a holder, doesn't matter. Anything you want to give it a name. And then what I want here is a closing div. Alright, so once we have this, and I realize that we can just remove that indentation there, that's not necessary. Save that, refresh. Now we have this nice toggle button. So the next thing what we're going to do here is basically create what I would say the CSS style. So let's say here for the button, let's make it very simple. I'm going to give it a border, sorry, a border solid 2 pixel black. And then what we can say here, some padding of 10 pixels. If I save that, refresh, alright, that looks slightly more appealing. And of course, right now, mobile version is still not working, but don't worry about that. We're going to work on that. But you can see here what I would like to do here. There should be some space between these two elements. So I'm going to say your margin, bottom, 10 pixels. So once we did this, save that, there we are. So now we have this. So the next thing what I want to do here is basically focus on two items. Well, we have the holder. I guess we can do the holder quickly. The holder will be very straightforward. We're going to say here class holder. And the class holder will have a width of 100%, which makes sense because we want to have the full screen. the full screen and the full height. And then we're going to say your height. And this will be, for now, 100%. And later on, we're going to play around with that. So if I save this now and refresh, nothing happens yet. Because right now, the canvas, or specifically the div holder, is being contained by the chart box. The chart box controls basically the maximum size. And that's what we're going to adjust later on. What I do want to do here is the following. Is when I click on this button, and right now it just doesn't work, of course we didn't trigger the function yet. What we want to do then is we want to give this a full screen. So that would mean that we want to add, on clicking here, adding a new class that would recognize that this div needs to be now full screen. So let's go and work on that. So we're going to say class chart box, and then we say also another one, let's say full width, or not even full screen would be more appropriate. There we are. So what does this do? Don't put a space here. Well, maybe it's possible as well, but indicating this would indicate the following. That if we have a div element or an element with the class that contains chart box and full width, it will get this, or whatever we have here, it will be applied, but also we will apply whatever is in here, and it will override whatever would be in here if that would counteract. So for example, if this would be background color white, and we indicate here background color black, because it's more specific, and we would have here the class in here chart box, for example this, full screen, and this will be background, let's make that then black, it will overrule the white color. So if I save this now and refresh, you can see here now, it overrules it. And this is what we want to do, because with this, we can then start to play around by adding specifically with a toggle class. We toggle the class. Once we click on it, we show the class, and then we have this design. And then, of course, once we are click again, it will remove this full screen, and then we go back to our original design of the class here. So that's what we want to do here. This is a brilliant way to play around with CSS. So what I'm going to say here, first of all, we want to have a background color of black. But what we will have is basically the width will be 100% of the screen. And the height will be 100%. And then, if I save this right now and refresh, this works like this, but you can see it doesn't look really appropriate. Everything just doesn't make sense. So what we need to do here is to make sure that we overrule everything. Remove definitely these border lines here and the border radius. But also overrule that we are in the corner here, that everything else here behind will not be noticed. So what we're going to do here, first of all, we're going to say position absolute. So this would mean that now we're going to change it, and we're going to change the coordinates where we are exactly in. And we can specify specifically at pixel 0 or left and right, or left and top. So basically X and Y coordinates. So if you're very familiar with Canvas, we work with X and Y coordinates. Basically here now with the absolute, we basically have X and Y coordinates, but instead of X and Y, we have here the left. How many pixels on the X are we going to move from left to right? Well, in this case, I will say 0 pixels. I don't want to move anything. I just want to be at the very side here, basically at the side itself. And you can see here now, the border here matches nicely. And later, once we remove the border, that will be really good, because then it will work nicely. So then, what I want to do as well for the Y value, the top, I'll say 0 as well. And now you can see here, basically, it just attaches nicely to the corner. But of course, we have the border, and we have this border radius. So we have here the border radius. Let's copy that. And we say your border radius equals 0. Save that. Refresh. Alright, that works. And now finally the border. So what I'm going to do is, instead of border, I'll just say border width. That's the only thing I want to remove. And just set this border width on 0, so then there is no border visible. There we are. So alright, so we have this here, and of course it looks still quite big, but this is basically what we need. So we're getting close to it. Now what I want to do is to make this toggle class here. So we have all of this here. What I want to do now is here, Onclick, and then we're going to do the following. We basically will save this, refresh, back to original, and then once we click on it, then it will work. So what I'm going to say here is a function, and this function is called the toggle chart or toggle size. It's toggle chart. All right, let's put it in there. And this function will have the following here. What we're going to do first is, of course, get the element we want to toggle with the class. And in this case, it was the chart box. Remember, we have the chart box and full screen here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say constant, and this constant will be chart box. It's just similar to the class. And then we say a document dot query selector. And this query selector, basically what this means is the following. Go into the HTML document and search for, which means query, means search for a selector. And a selector is in CSS and in JavaScript basically an element. An element could be a tag, or more specific, a specific class or ID. So we say here query selector, string, and then here we're going to say dot for the class, and we're going to just search for the chart box class. Once we have this, what we can do now is following. Well, if I do a console log, you will see it will grab now the specific class we just wanted. So if I refresh here, open up the developer tab. So once we've opened that, click on this, you can see here now we get the entire div with the class chart box. Beautiful. The only thing what I do want here is, of course, to add, or not add, but to specifically toggle. And toggle means like a checkbox. When you click on it, it shows, and when you click again on it, it disappears. So we want to toggle that. And we say here then class list with capital L dot toggle. So this is a specific function. This is a string value, but no need to put a dot here. The reason why we don't need a dot is because we're already indicating that this is a class. So JavaScript understands this is a class. It makes sense. And then right now I have this console log. Sorry, let's remove that console log. We don't need that. We just want this specific element, which is the class list with chart box. And then here, class list toggle. And what are we going to toggle? Well, we're going to toggle the class we added here, full width. Copy this. Paste that in there, and now save this and refresh, and then once we click on this, there we are. Alright, so this looks good, but of course the size is severely too large. So what we need to do here now is start to make this a bit more intelligent. And this is, well, as you can see here, we have the first part with CSS we have solved, but we didn't solve now what we call the JavaScript and the Chart.js settings. So that's what we're going to do now. So what we're going to do here now is the following. We're going to work here in the options. I'm going to put in here a specific item, and this is absolutely required. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say here responsive, and this is by default, so this one you might even ignore, but that's alright. I'll just put it in there just to force it. And then we're going to say here maintain aspect ratio, and this will be set on true, and we will be needing this because later on we want to reference to this, and if we don't put it in here, the reference will be on undefined, meaning that the object doesn't exist here. So we are going to put it in here, even though it's already by default set on true. So you might say, well, why do we have this redundant item if it's by default set on true? Well, if it's not found in the object, it will be returned later on in JavaScript as undefined, and that can sometimes give us an issue. So that's why I want to just set this already here so it's visible for JavaScript. So, and then what we want to do here is we're going to do this here, basically here we can say aspect ratio, and we're going to work later on this, but this will set on 1 for now. So let's save that, refresh. Alright, click on this, there we are. So nothing really happens here because we didn't do anything else, because all of this is basically a default. It's always by default responsive. Maintain aspect ratio is always set on true, and aspect ratio for the donut chart is like a square shape, so that is always set on true as well. But if we would have a bar chart, then it would be like a rectangle shape. That's basically the differences in aspect ratio 2 to 1, meaning the width is 2 pixels in width, or basically 2 to 1 of width to height 1. So if I do this now, you can see here we get a different shape, which is a rectangle shape. Alright, let's put this back to 1. Refresh, there we are. So now what I want to do here is the following. I want to say here a item, because what I want to grab first is the maintain aspect ratio. So I'm going to do here console log. Let me say here my chart. Basically that's this item here, and then from there we go to config, and then from config, and this config refers to this constant here, which is the config. We can go here to options, and then from options dot we can go here to maintain aspect ratio. So if I save this, refresh, click, you can see it's true. Here's the thing, if I comment this out as I indicated, we get now undefined. well, it still works and everything, but it can create an error for us. So I don't want this undefined. I prefer to have it defined. Also for debugging, if you see undefined, it usually indicates something might be wrong with your code, or at least for me. It's usually an indicator that we have some problem here, or we didn't assign a value. So I want to make sure that I just assign a value by default, so we don't have this automatic response. So what I want to do then now is an if statement. And our if statement is the following. I'm going to say if. And here's the thing here. This was struggling with me, and maybe it will work. We will test it. Because I noticed that, let's call this the MAR or MA ratio. I'm going to put it like this. Alright. So I noticed when I did this, referring to this, I tend to get a undesired response. However, let's try and see, so you will understand as well. Normally, I would say just full text, but let's see. But let's try this here on video as well. So what I'm going to do here is basically I'm going to grab this, and if statement will be the following. Very simple if statement, which says the following. If my maintain aspect ratio equals true, which is set by default on true, in that case, I want to say, well, let's try this, FA equals false. And then, if that is not the case, what I want to say here is the following, or what we could do here, not that one here, we just do here, else, what I want to do here, MA ratio equals true. And then here, what I need to do here, of course, just make sure we say here let value, so we refer to that. And then once we have this, we can save this, and of course, it won't work yet. And the reason why this doesn't work yet, we need to update the chart. So I'm going to say here, my chart dot update, and let's see if this works. Save that, refresh. There we are, and there we are. You can see here, for some reason, it just always reads true, which should not be the case because it should change it. And this is the only thing I cannot explain. This must be something in Chartjs. So that's why I have to put in the full code instead of the shorthand of it, or the reference of it. So if I save this and then refresh, do here, and you can see here now it's false. True, false. True, false. Alright, so this works, but you can see here we have still some space here that is undesirable. So I'm going to explain where the space is coming from. It comes from this part here. Well, first of all, this here, this 40 pixels, is a big issue. Secondly, we have this padding here. So what I'm going to do here first is use a tool that we see very often in CSS. So scroll up here, go in here, in the default here. So this is the hashtag, or this is an asterisk, meaning that it will trigger on every element this default setting. I need to use another one as well, which is called box sizing. This is a very important one, but usually many people are always having this by default saying border box. So what is the difference between border box? Because the default is set on content box. Sorry, content, not context, but content box. So what this does is by default, if we, for example, assign a width of 100 pixels, then with the content box, it will mean that the width is based on the content, excluding any pixels and borders. So we don't want this, because right now our content is too big, and I want the content to be including calculating how many pixels of borders and how many pixels in padding we have. So what we need to do here is then a border box, meaning we calculate the width and the height based on the borders instead of from the content. So I hope that's a clear one. You see this very often, but maybe it's not always clear. But now you probably know. All right. So now we have this, and you can see here we have some space here still, and we also have this color here. What is the issue here? So now we have this. The real issue here is basically the remaining this part here, which is about 39 pixels to be exact. But we can do it on 40 pixels. We have calculated here the width, and this width was 100%. But the 100% also calculated this here, and that's why we have this scrollable bar here. I don't want this. I want, if we do a full width, it should be just intelligent enough to understand how big our screen is. It's a computer or website must understand this kind of logic. So this is what we're going to solve. So we're going to scroll down here, and we go to our holder here. The holder here has a height of 100%. But you remember, this item here has about 40 pixels. So what we need to do is 100% minus 40 pixels to calculate it correctly. So we're going to use a feature in CSS called cal. And this cal, which stands for calculation, will just do the following: 100% in pixels minus 40 pixels. That will be the new height. And if I save this now, refresh, if I click here now, there you are. So now we have this here, and you might say this is absolutely phenomenal, which it is, of course, but we have an issue still. If I open up here Developer tab, click on this, it looks fine. Now let's click here on Mobile, toggle looks fine, and then here, once we do this, we get this massive problem here. So what is the issue here? Well, the issue is basically on the chart box here. This is basically what we need to make mobile responsive. We could say here, if the screen size will be equal to X amount, we can change that, which of course we have to change also with the aspect ratio. I realize that we still need to do here something, but we can also do here now with an adjustment on the width. And what we can do here, let's say instead of width 400 pixels, let's make this just 80 pixels. Save that. Now we change that. Alright, and click on this. So this starts to work better already. What we can do more, and let's do this. We have this here. We can still maybe make this a different shape. So what I'm going to look here, we have the maintain aspect ratio by default. But if I do this on tools, save this. We have this shape, and maybe that looks on here a bit more appropriate if we compare to this. If I save this, well, alright, so you can see here, I don't know what happened. That's fair enough. We can just do this. So what I'm going to do here is just a tiny adjustment here. And if I go back here to mobile, alright, then if I refresh, you can see here. So the mobile here, alright, that looks 80%. I was expecting that this should definitely work. Oh, of course. The reason why now this is because we have hard-coded this here. So what I want to do, I want to make this intelligent. Meaning that if our screen is mobile or below 600 pixels, make the maintain aspect ratio a square. Or number 1. So it will be a square, like that. That looks, of course, a bit more appropriate. So what I'm going to do here is final feature, which is in the aspect ratio, we're going to make a callback feature or callback functionality. So I'm going to say here this context, and then here a function expression arrow, or arrow function expression, that's the right term, sorry. So which basically means function. And then in here, what I'm going to say here is the following: if, and then we're going to say here, select window dot inner width. This indicates the width of the item here, or specifically the drawing part here. Let me just stop that. Alright, the drawing part here. That's the most important one. So that will be measured, which will be the width of 375 in this case. So what I want to do here then, if inner width is smaller than 600 pixels, or 600, in that case, I want to say return number 1. And then else, let's make here a semicolon just to make it a bit more neat. Else, if that is not the case, or if it's bigger, what I want to do then is return number 2. So once we did that, let's see, I figured out that we're missing here a item. Am I correct? Alright, yes, we have this. So let's put this properly, because I realized that I have one curly brace too much. Alright, so now we have it correctly, so this would be there, and this one would cover this. Alright, and finally this is that one here, and this is the options. Alright, save that, refresh, and then, oh, alright, we have unexpected token here on 115. What is 115? Sorry, don't do that. Refresh, there we are. Toggle size, there we are. So you can see this already works already quite acceptable, and it looks quite nice. Now let's open up this, do here again, and refresh, just make sure I do this. There we are. So now it's a nice rectangle here, and then if we change this, then it will become a nice square here. Beautiful. And this is basically how you can make a mobile responsive version of a chart and toggle them to full size. So if you enjoyed this video here, maybe you want to have, for example, not only for a single chart, what if you want to have multiple charts? So with multiple charts, we have another one here where we have a select box where we can select, for example, the line chart, or specifically the bar chart that will extend in size, which requires a different setup because it's a different way of doing. So that will be another option as well to consider.